All right, next up, we have a panel discussion, Beyond the Buzz, Digital Health Solutions in Action. Matteo diTommaso will be moderating, our Senior Vice President of Global Drug Development, BI&T, whose role I know did just expand, so I'll need you to give an update on that. And then we have three fantastic leaders, CEOs and founders from wearables, device companies, and are really experts in the field of digital measures. So welcome.
All right, thank you, Lauren. I'm really happy to be here, and it's fantastic to have this incredibly diverse, cross-functional team in the room, because it takes that kind of diversity of scientists, clinicians, technologists, entrepreneurs to really look at what we can do and to imagine the possibility for how we can accelerate our clinical trials and how we can complement our drugs in the market as BMS. We've heard about the enormous possibility of the technology, whether it's the cloud computing that we have today, it's the large language models and generative AI that's emerging extraordinarily rapidly over the last couple of years, or it's the ability to manufacture and create products that combine, like the last one we saw, a traditional stethoscope concept and form factor with all of this new technology. So there's incredible potential there. And what we're going to explore on this panel is some of the pragmatic uses of it. What does it actually take to make it work? What do you have to bring together? Where is it working today with real examples? And I'm really proud to be able to sit here with this group of CEO, entrepreneur, digital health innovators and have a conversation about their experiences. I'm just going to start by letting everybody introduce themselves, tell a little bit about who they are. I am Matteo diTommaso. I lead drug development and now R&D, business insights and technology for BMS. And as Lauren mentioned, my role recently expanded to include research in addition to drug development and the analytics pieces. I'll go ahead and hand it over to John.
Great, well, thanks. Are we on?
I'll give you this one.
Testing. All right. Well, thanks, Matteo. It's great to be here today. Great to be here with you all. Great to see a lot of familiar faces here in the audience. And Lauren, again, thank you for everything you do to put this together. It's a tremendous day. I'm John Gannon. I'm the CEO of Blue Spark Technologies. We make a continuous temperature monitoring system for patients. We sell that patients to the clinical environment where it's used as a standard of care for remote patient monitoring and inpatient monitoring. And then we also sell that into clinical trials for data collection and patient safety. And we'll talk more about that as we go through the panel.
Yeah, check. Hello. Good. Matteo, thank you for the introduction. Lauren, thank you for setting this up, and it's good to see everybody today. I'm Jeremy Wyatt. I'm the CEO of Actigraph. We are a medical-grade digital platform. We collect raw data from sensors in clinical research and use that data for either safety or efficacy studies to give objective views on what's happening with patients during the clinical trial. And excited to talk more about that today and sit next to my buddy, Chris.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Matteo and Lauren. It's really nice to be here. I'm Chris Benko. I'm the CEO of a new company that I'm not talking about yet. I spent the last 11 years running a company that I co-founded that was a pioneer in digital biomarkers called Connexa. I spent the prior 20 years at Merck.
Great, thank you guys. I'm going to just start with, what are you doing today that's really working in clinical trials? Maybe you can share some examples of how your technologies are really working. I think digital health has been around for a while, the concept of digital health, and it doesn't necessarily mean more than a buzzword to a lot of people. So I think, can you make that real for us?
Sure, I can start. So one of the concrete examples that I like to go over, we've been working for a couple of years now with MD Anderson, Dr. Karina Patel, who is a lead in multiple myeloma at MD Anderson. The study that we've been working on has been to show the feasibility and cost effectiveness of moving CAR T to the outpatient setting. So what they have been able to find is by using a system, in our case, like the TempTrack continuous monitoring system, they've been able to reduce their length of stay from 14 days to between 3 and 4 days. So almost a 10-day, more than a 10-day reduction in length of stay. That is a significantly positive impact for the patient experience, but also a significant financial benefit to the institution. So one concrete example.
Concrete example.
Yeah, sure. Lots of activity in this space, and I think we're starting to see right now the demonstration of where these technologies are becoming real. I just saw Ken Getz last week, and he presented this data where the approval rate for drugs has dropped from like 20% in the mid-90s to less than 8% today, and the return R&D investment has gone from I think it was like in the 15 to 20% in the early 2000s, now down to below 5%. You can do better with a standard stock in the S&P 500. It's amazing. So the onus is on us as technology innovators to figure that out. I think we have seen some really promising things happening in different areas where our technology has been used, in particular in areas like cancer cachexia research that we're doing that's public, where we're looking at patients and observing clinically meaningful changes in their overall physical behaviors they're being treated and how that's impacting the ability for them to move along faster in the trial. Nocturnal scratch is another area where we're adding objective measures to atopic dermatitis and eczema patients who are undergoing treatments. The Bellerophon study, which we talked about ad nauseum, we were able to see a 50% reduction in sample size in that particular study for interstitial lung disease, bringing a measurement that actually means something to patients rather than just, asking them how they feel, which is a lot of times what we do. And so a lot of examples out there, and we can dig into more of those, but excited about them.
So I think it's really easy and natural in our business to focus on the phenomenal opportunities of using a digital tool to do something like inform an approval or a go no go decision. But I think it's also a little unrealistic to put all of the weight on that when you look at where the actual time and capital is spent in our business. It's mostly on failure. And I actually see some of the most useful deployments of digital tools and digital measures in rare disease programs, particularly because many of the rare disease targets people are going after don't have established measures. So instead of trying to figure out how to replace or beat a gold standard, there are a lot of rare disease sponsors that are doing natural history studies that help them figure out whether or not to pursue a particular program or how to design an endpoint. And even the observational data that comes out of the natural history studies is incredibly informative to how we continue to evaluate opportunities to pursue rare disease programs. It's hard to name them specifically because when you do, you automatically give away the sponsors. So many of the rare disease companies are, almost solo or one of two working in a given area. But there's been a ton of activity and work in that space, and I think it's to be expected that those are areas where there are huge unmet needs, and digital tools provide people a way to much more robustly characterize these diseases that haven't been studied or understood because we've never thought that we could actually impact them.
Yeah, maybe, Chris, that opens up a really important topic, right, of how do you overcome, what are the root causes of all of that failure, and is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? How do we think about that? How do you think about that?
So, yeah, it's a great question, Matteo. I think one of the biggest challenges is figuring out whether or not you can replace a known way of doing things. And I think it's easier in an area that's totally unsatisfied. I think the reason that you've seen a lot of people invest in digital in diseases like Parkinson's, which has gotten a huge amount of investment, my last company did that as well, it's because most people have figured out that the traditional primary endpoints are probably not going to work. A couple of people have done large phase 3 studies in Parkinson's that have been inconclusive, including Merck, where I once worked. 1,500 people went through a preladolent study with the traditional UPDRS, and it showed no significance. So we know that those measures are unsatisfying, and we know in rare disease areas we don't even have measures. So I think that's very motivating. I think when you go into more traditional areas like heart failure, for example, it's very, very difficult to displace the idea that we have existing measures that have been proven and worked. And when you get to phase 3, that's where you want to go. You want to minimize the overall burden on the study. And so I think where we have to look for innovation, it's in the places where there are unmet needs, where these technologies can truly help. I think it'll be a lot longer before we're able to displace endpoints in areas that are well established and have had repeated therapies come to market using traditional measures.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. I mean, honestly, I tell people all the time the way we measure Parkinson's, Chris, we ask somebody to tap their fingers and we count how many times they can tap their fingers. It's just not repeatable or effective, and phase 3 results fail to duplicate phase 2 findings, and it's just a problem. there's opportunity there, but certainly agree with Chris heavily on the idea that where we see a clear unmet need. You know, if you're developing a business in this space, it's difficult because you know your established norms are there. Everybody's okay. We know the FDA is going to be happy with this, but really where the areas are accelerating are places where we see just a clear, there's no other way to do this, right? Or the way we're doing it is just not effective or not meaningful at all to the patient. I appreciate groups like DIME who have elevated the qualitative research on these patients. I appreciate some of the work coming out of FDA around patient centricity and what does that look like. But really what we got to get to, guys, is action. How do we take that into a trial and demonstrate, you know, that this is effective, that it can happen? And I think some of the problems that we see personally are just things that you wouldn't think of or problems necessarily when you talk about technology, right? Operational problems, issues with getting these things to sites, issues with getting the technology out there, understanding the data, mistransfers of that data. A lot of handoffs that don't happen because there's not something crossing the silos necessarily with these, you know, groups that we're working with in different sponsor organizations.
Maybe I'll ask the panel, anybody can answer this one, in terms of therapeutic area opportunities. Obviously, BMS is in neurology and immunology and oncology and cardiovascular disease. Each of you, maybe, where do you see that there is that kind of unmet need and opportunity for digital devices? And maybe a little bit about what is that opportunity? Is it validated endpoint, or is it something else in the way that it, you know, the consultants, I've read PwC and ICON and many other overviews of how are you going to dramatically change the cost of clinical trials, speed up decision-making, keep patients safe, enormous numbers of in terms of that opportunity. Where is that opportunity, and how do we see that as real and not just industry hype?
So probably start with collaboration is particularly important. And we have found this across working with a number of pharma and biotech companies. We've done work with BMS over time on oncology and CRS. Oncology is one of the areas that we do a tremendous amount of work in, so we're familiar with it. Right now, we've got a really good collaboration that we're doing with Takeda Pharmaceuticals, and that is on identifying CRS early by evaluating a multi-vital sign platform. And I think those types of collaborations will ultimately familiarize the sites with these technologies. And I think that there's a positive feedback loop between sites being comfortable with the technologies and pharmaceutical companies being comfortable with using these technologies in clinical trials. And I think it's continuing to reinforce itself. We're seeing an acceleration in that space, and you know, we're hoping to continue to see that.
Yeah, I'll just say to your question, Matteo, we see a lot of opportunity in the rare disease area, and I'd love to hear Chris's opinion, but ALS, huge area of unmet need and difficult because it's a rare area. How do you measure somebody who has a degenerative disease that, you know, we can't do 6-minute walk because they can't walk at a certain point in their journey? So how do we be consistent across the study? So how does upper limb mobility play into that? We've already seen approvals happening in the AMA around SV95C for the measurement of Duchenne's muscular dystrophy as another example. So I think we're starting to see some of those types of areas that stack up where, you know, we know that there's an opportunity there for adoption because there's really no other alternative. So, yeah.
I would love to see more investment in neuropsychiatry and specifically looking at the actual on-market cost benefits. So, you know, BMS has a really incredibly important investment in schizophrenia. It's one of the highest cost diseases to our healthcare system. And as much as it's scientifically interesting to interrogate things in the early stage and learn more about a disease, I think ultimately what we need to do to drive adoption is convince payers that our therapies are valuable and worthwhile. And I think that in really complex diseases with complex patients, like in schizophrenia, focusing on where you can move the economic outcome for the payer is going to be incredibly valuable because people really, really care about keeping these patients healthier, better, and safer because it does cost so much to take care of them in the traditional standards. So I personally, if I had the ability to make those kind of investment decisions, schizophrenia is an incredibly tough area. There are many, many therapies on market, but being able to differentiate with digital tools how you can make an impact impact on the actual quality and cost of care, I think is a tremendous opportunity. And I think, unfortunately, we've seen these kind of ebbs and flows of people investing in neuropsych, and that makes it hard to sort of consistently work toward that direction. But if there's one area where I would love to see the field sort of committed to the long term to doing better measures, I think that would be a fantastic area to have an impact. And it's an area where we know the existing measures are very, very challenging.
I was in a clinical trial site yesterday. My flight was delayed, and I got home late last night coming back from a clinical trial site. But it's vivid and fresh in my mind today, the heterogeneity of clinical trial sites, from academic medical centers to community hospitals, even here in the United States. And then you think of our clinical trials running globally. So you've got that heterogeneity, the heterogeneity of standard of care across the globe, all of that complexity. What are some of the challenges that you've faced bringing your products to market, challenges that will help us to live in that real world and make these tools valuable for us and accelerating ultimately our medicines?
Oh, sure. You bring up a good point. I mean, the reality is the patients that are being treated on these clinical trials are often under great distress, and putting a digital health tool in their hands can sometimes cause further distress. That really calls, I think, for two things. One, the design of the tools has to be such that they're incredibly usable. I think Carrie referenced something on the order of passive almost, something where they're putting it on and it's just happening and there's not a lot of interaction required by the patient. And then I think beyond that, medical affairs, I think everybody has a medical affairs team, has to do a really good job of training the sites that can be pushed down to train the patients so they're familiar with these tools. And then it actually circles all the way back to the introduction of these technologies at the beginning of the trial by the CRO. We do find that often we have to be a little more assertive on working with the sponsor, working with the CRO to get our medical affairs people on sites to be able to train to ensure that that information, you take out the variability of site-to-site interactions by having really well trained medical affairs people go in along with the CRO to do the training of either the site investigator or all the way down to the patients.
So it's that change management wrapper and the support and training around the introduction of the technology that's a critical piece of that.
Yeah, nothing super exciting around some of the challenges there. I think, we've learned the hard way that you can't give a manual this thick, to a site. You need to show them a video of what they need to do to train these patients. I also think this idea of making these measures optional is a terrible idea. I think when we see that, we almost 100% crater the adoption of these measures, and any investment that happens pretty much gets lost, and then to try to go back and do business again is just, it's gone because somebody got burned in that process. That's hard. Another area where we've tried to find a niche is that we want to collect as much data as we can from these patients without overburdening the patients, and so we try to get very granular on the type of data that we collect from them, as pure and raw as possible. So if you're collecting data from a heart rate sensor, I don't want to know their heart rate. I want to interpret that waveform into heart rate variability, AFib detection, and in some cases blood pressure, so that I can get a clear measure of what's happening across the patient, especially if it's an exploratory view on what we're trying to get at from the patient. So we've gotten out of the pilot phase. We're actually doing it now, but we can't commoditize it yet, right? This isn't a paper survey. And so your CROs cannot come in and say, let me just find the lowest price solution here. They have to come in as a partner with this and bring that to the pharma companies almost as if, hey, I'm enabling a new path forward here, not I'm trying to add on, an add-on to the to the contract so I can make more money. We got to get past that. It's killing us. But sorry.
I just know you're inspiring me, but I think
Get on my
I think that there's huge value in paying a lot of attention to site initiation visits and training. Sites want to do the right thing. Investigators want to do the right thing. All too often we go in and we say, here's how to use this technology. Go do this. It's a tell. You need to enroll people at the sites in why we're doing what we're doing. Many times these measures, these new measures, are going to be unfamiliar. And so if the sites understand that this data is going to be valuable and it's going to impact how their patients are treated, how they receive care, whether or not their therapies are approved, they buy in so differently than if you just tell them, oh, we want you to use this tool or put this device on someone. That becomes a compliance exercise. You need to build genuine commitment and enthusiasm, and that's why I think being directly involved with your sites, not delegating this through a CRO, that's kind of what you tripped me up on, or through a technology provider, is not the right way to do it. You have to really, really engage the people that are frontline with the patients.
Let me ask you, I think we're running low on time, so I'll just ask one more question around partnership and collaboration. As we want to work with companies like yours to change the trajectory of our clinical trials, to have an impact on our patient populations, what does good collaboration look like? What do you need to be successful? What are some success factors around working together that are really critical for success?
So I referenced earlier some of the work we're doing with Takeda right now, and I think that's a good example. We're working with Melinda Chen and Eric Koenig and Jen Seigelman earlier on, and designed a study that could ultimately be published and hopefully be used as a best practice across industry around multi-vital sign platform management for early detection of CRS. We're enrolling the last patient right now. We'll hopefully be presenting that data at ASH later this year, but we also work with DIME and CancerX, as does Takeda, and we'll be able to share that data with those groups that will, as I said, hopefully be able to continue to show a potential direction on how to manage that symptom.
Need really good, friendly legal people at the sponsor board. Is there anybody here? No.
We might have some legal people.
Without pitching what we do, we actually had success here. I'm very proud of it. We have a program that we put together called Decode. I'd love to tell you what the acronym stands for, but I had to ask one of my teammates. But it's digital endpoint collaboration, and so we've had success specifically in nocturnal scratch, where we've brought in publicly UCB, Takeda, J&J, and one other unnamed sponsor to develop a novel algorithm to detect scratching at night for patients in atopic dermatitis and eczema. We've scaled that and brought that collaboratively to the FDA to begin to get pre-approval. That's been great because all the stakeholders want something out of this, and we sort of defined those terms going in, and we all went together. We're doing it again in obesity for GLP-1 assets. That's kicking off in June with some sponsors. We're doing it again coming up late in the year for CRS detection for CAR T and T-cell engagers. It's been exciting.
Thank you.
I was super proud of my last company that we were able to engage both Regeneron and Merck as co-sponsors of a study that we ran. I don't think you need to wait for a consortium of 10 if you can get 2 or 3 companies willing to work together, and don't be piggish about data and IP. In most cases, this data should be pre-competitive. People have different interests in different assets, and so if you just share the IP and the data and you can get people who are willing, there's so much power and strength in numbers.
And can we also agree that pharma is developing drugs, not algorithms? Can we do that? Okay.
Yes.
Absolutely. I think we're out of time. Do we have time for a little question?
Time for
from the
one
audience?
question that ties in perfectly. I did want to prioritize this question from the audience. Given the long lead times required for study and validation, how do you keep up with market needs to avoid being obsolete by the time you complete validation?
Can I say it? Okay. I mentioned a second ago, but it's an excellent, excellent question. In the example I gave around nocturnal scratch, I mentioned that a few times. It just happens to be an area we're doing a lot of work in. We don't wait for the algorithm before we start collecting data on these patients because it's bidirectional. That data is informing what we're doing, and because the technology is able to collect data in an unadulterated, unprocessed fashion, we're in a great world where we can stick that in Azure and process it in a different way if we want later. But we get the data now. We collect it now. We do the technical verification. We know the technology is safe. We have the 510K. Let's start collecting the data, and these things will come as we grow and develop together. In some cases, it's more mature, but there's no need to wait.
Great. Well, thank you all. That wraps up our first
All right, thanks, everybody.
session of the day.
Thanks a lot, Jeremy. That's great.
And welcome you all to head back
Thank you.
just through the glass doors off to the left into our training center. You'll see lots of refreshments, as well as have the opportunity to see our exhibitor booths. Thank you.